You mentioned that things can go wrong very, very often, and they can go wrong in Bitcoin. If you were to put one or two things, what scares you most that can go wrong to derail this movement?
In these systems of technology, I think most of the engineering challenges are not unsolvable. There are always engineering challenges. There are bugs, there are difficulties in code. In Bitcoin, for example, we make a very important trade-off where we trade the ability to be efficient and scalable to gain freedom and decentralization. And that's a very explicit trade. We want a system that is decentralized and robust, but in order to get that system, we don't have the most efficient system. And that makes scaling difficult. It's a difficult engineering problem, which requires sometimes technologically complex solutions. Very often, some of the technologies that appear very simple on the surface are unimaginably complex under the surface. The fact that we're doing this video call right now, I don't even know where you are, doesn't matter, and it's working. As someone who studied internet engineering, I know how many layers of technology of unimaginable complexity, some of which a single layer is an entire professional discipline that someone specializes in. And so these things can go wrong, of course, absolutely. But when they go wrong, you simply fix them and you improve them and make sure they don't go wrong again. And if you repeat that over several hundreds or thousands of cycles, you end up with very robust systems. The trick is to not have something that goes wrong so catastrophically that it takes everything down permanently. And I'm not worried about that because that's simply a matter of engineering. Then there's the other part. Those damn pesky humans. If this was simply a matter of technology, I wouldn't worry about it too much. But the truth is that Bitcoin is not just a complex engineering endeavor, it is also a very complex social human structure. It has governance, it has people with incentives and motivations and egos and their own agendas sometimes. And it brings with it an entire culture. It is an internet subculture. And not just Bitcoin, but the entire cryptocurrency and blockchain space, the various competing factions between various cryptocurrencies, the various competing factions within Bitcoin. And very quickly, people end up aligning essentially their motivations with a sense of identity. This is not just about defending a specific engineering choice. It becomes about this is the correct way and only this because my ego and identity is wrapped up in this one thing. That's where we can go wrong. So I'm more worried about fragmentation of the culture, infighting, and basically the human failings overwhelming engineering solutions. I think that is a very, very real risk.
Speaking of the social and mainstream consciousness, I remember holiday 2017. I heard the word Bitcoin a few times prior, and I'm getting my hair cut. My barber's talking about getting Bitcoin and how he's going to make money. And I'm in Starbucks and I'm waiting on my coffee and I hear another person talk about how they're going to make so much money. And then once again, January 2021, I guess I just wonder, as an expert and someone who really cares about this, how does it feel emotionally when we're going through moments of mania? Or am I wrong for even using that term? Are these natural ups and downs? Or are these kind of seemingly, from my perspective, manic moments of ups and downs, potentially like attracting maybe the wrong crowd? Or is that my failing to think that?
No, I mean, these are moments of mania. And they're actually pretty uncomfortable for those of us who are working in this space, especially those of us who got into this space because they want to see a technological and engineering and perhaps sometimes a political vision unfold. And the money stuff just makes things murky. It doesn't help. It helps because it provides funding. for our activities. Honestly, I used to collect statistical data of my various business activities. How many books did we sell? How many people visited the website? How many people downloaded my videos? And then I realized that it was completely pointless. Because if you plot those things against the Bitcoin price, it's a one-to-one correlation. So I could be doing great videos or crappy videos. Is the Bitcoin price going up? Yay! Super successful. Growth, growth, growth. Is it going down? Some of my best work actually is done in the lulls in between. When all of these distractions, all of this noise, right now I'm getting calls from journalists all over the world several times a day. Can you come and talk to us? Can you come and talk to us? Where were all of you people in 2019? And so the noise can get very distracting. It's also a very dangerous time because this is the time when scams proliferate, when opportunists take advantage, when the principles that I particularly care about, principles of decentralization, of political empowerment, of independence and freedom, all of these things get diluted by this insatiable greed and chasing of the money. So yeah, it's weird. But here's the thing. I think it's important to recognize and notice something, and this is really important to notice. This mania happened in 2021, right? The previous one happened in 2017. The previous one happened in 2013. And the one before that was when it started all in 2009. Do you notice a pattern?
Yeah, why is that?
Every 4 years.
Yeah.
That pattern is actually built into Bitcoin. Every 4 years, as part of the algorithm, the amount of Bitcoin that is created is cut in half. Every block that is produced in Bitcoin has an amount of new Bitcoin that is mined or minted, that is entered into circulation. And this is part of the monetary policy, the distribution mechanism of Bitcoin. And when it started in 2009, every block contained 50 Bitcoin. And then in the beginning of 2013 or the end of 2012, that got cut in half to 25 Bitcoin. Within a year of it getting cut in half, the number of the interest in Bitcoin went through the roof, and the price did one of these, right? Then it collapsed, but it collapsed to a level that was far higher than it had ever been before. And then it kind of went sideways for 3.5 years, and then the reward gets cut in half again, and just 6 months later, woof, again, and again, and again. Now we've gone through this cycle 4 times, and it's no longer a surprise. To those of us who are paying attention, this is not a surprise. The reason this happened is the same reason it happened back in 2017. If the same number of people are trying to buy Bitcoin, more or less, and suddenly there's half as much Bitcoin available on a daily basis, the only way to get your hands on that, supply and demand, is for the price to double. And the problem, of course, is that when it starts climbing, because there's pressure in the market, because more people are chasing after fewer Bitcoin, that price signal creates a mania. People see the price rising, and then they assume it's going to continue rising, so they are suddenly interested in buying in. And they pile on, and more people pile on, until eventually it overshoots the level at which the fundamentals of the technology can sustain this price level, and then it has a fairly sudden reversion to mean, and it overshoots the other way a bit, and then it goes sideways for 3.5 years. So yes, this is a mania, but it's not random. This is actually part of the growth cycle of Bitcoin. It's because this is indeed a scarce asset which is produced in limited quantities, and those limited quantities are reduced every 4 years, creating these mini manias. Now, obviously, the more people that know and anticipate this, the less it creates a surprise, the less it creates an exuberance. Those of us who've been through 4 cycles of this at this point are kind of a bit amused by the craziness of it all. And the truth is really simple. Anything that goes up by double or triple numbers in a period of months will come down hard. It doesn't matter, because the long-term trend continues to be steady upwards, and the technology continues to get better, and it continues to provide useful things for more people around the world.
Wow, I had no idea of these 4-year cycles. In my head, I was telling myself, oh, it maybe the pandemic caused people to be at home and talk about it, and then there was all these conversations started. But it's very interesting, and I had no idea that every 4 years you've seen something like this happen, and I'm sure you could predict it in the future. With all the misinformation out there, and your mission being to create clear, neutral stance, out of all the emails from your friends in high school asking you questions, or all the tweets you see, what is like the biggest misconception that you hear day in and day out about Bitcoin?
I think the biggest misconception is that people don't understand how money has value and why money has value. So in order to explain Bitcoin, I often have to take a step back and explain money at a very fundamental level. So if you ask the average person, why does money have value? Why does the US dollar, why does the Canadian dollar have value? They're actually many people will come back with a mythological answer. They'll be like, oh, it's because of the gold in the vaults. And they'll say this with complete certainty. They'll even smile a lot because they know they have the right answer. And that's basically like an 8-year-old explaining Christmas to you by invoking Santa Claus. It's got the same level of basis in rational thought. If you ask a few probing questions, it will fall apart really fast.
Can I guess, and feel free to tell me if this is wrong, was money created to keep track of debt? Is that right, or is that wrong?
Yes. Money is created as a mechanism to record debt, and as a means to have a standardized unit. But money is basically a measuring stick, and another way to think about it is it's a language for communicating value across distance, but also across time. So if I have a unit of value and I need to communicate that to someone who's on the other side of the planet, I use money for that function. If I have a unit of value and I don't want to spend it today, but I want to make sure that it will still buy me 3 eggs tomorrow, transporting value through time is also a function of this technology. But the reason money has value is really simple. It has value because other people anticipate it will still have value tomorrow, and that's because of the economic activity of labor, products, and services that is being engaged in the economy that uses that specific unit. So a Canadian dollar has value because the Canadian economy and all of the economic activity of Canadians and other people who use Canadian dollars creates a reasonable expectation that tomorrow you will be able to acquire goods and services with that unit of value. So then the question is, how can that possibly apply to Bitcoin? And it does in a small way. It applies because if you think of the economic activity that occurs on the internet that cannot occur with national currencies, and often in the early days, honestly, a lot of that was economic activity that a lot of people think should not occur. So, people buying cannabis or, various other things online, doing gambling in countries where gambling isn't allowed, but also refugees buying a ticket to exit a war-torn nation, smuggling goods into a country that has a food shortage, etc., etc. That's also an area where traditional national currencies fall short. Sending money back home when the mechanisms that exist are not very good. All of that is economic activity. Over time, more and more of that is perfectly legitimate economic activity. It's how I pay payroll for my contractors and suppliers around the world because it's much, much more convenient, fast, and secure than traditional currency and banking systems. The more economic activity that occurs, the more future value people can assume will exist in this system. And when it's also scarce, then you get value in the currency. So those are the two aspects, utility and scarcity. If you think about it, when you have a unit of measurement, when I say I am 171 centimeters in height, a centimeter is not the thing that makes me tall. I am tall whether you count it in centimeters, meters, or millimeters. The centimeter itself has no height itself. It's just a way of measuring it, and it's just an agreed common standard of measurement. Well, if you think of money as a thing that measures the economy and the economic activity around it, then you think, okay, so Canadian dollar could briefly be summarized as take the economic activity of Canada and everyone using Canadian dollars and divide it by the number of these units that exist, and you get value in terms of what slice of that economic activity is encompassed in one Canadian dollar. Now, here's where some really extreme mathematics comes into play. What happens when you divide something by infinity? You get zero, right? So the problem is that if you take the Canadian economy and you say, tomorrow we will have twice as many Canadian dollars in the economy, everybody who doesn't understand economics goes, yay, that's awesome. But within a few weeks, eggs cost twice as much because the same amount of economic activity simply got divided by twice as many Canadian dollars, so each one just became half as useful. And this is why you can answer the question that the 6-year-old asks its parent, which is, Mommy, why can't we just give everybody more money? Because money isn't the thing of value. It's the economic activity that has value. And if you divide it into more units, you don't get taller. If I measure your height in millimeters, you didn't suddenly become taller. I just changed the number of units I'm using. And yet, for some reason, people don't understand that this applies to money. So one of the things that happens with Bitcoin is that not only are we not creating more and more and more of them, but in fact, there is a maximum limit on how many will be created, which means that if the economy that we're dividing into Bitcoin units, the economic activity that occurs on the internet with Bitcoin increases, and the number of units remains the same or even decreases, the end result is that that acquires more value. In the beginning, the economic activity was small, the number of units was plentiful, they weren't worth much. And that picture has gradually changed, creating the 4-year cycles we've seen now.
Wow. So let's wrap up on a bright and optimistic note. I wanted to ask you, what was the proudest moment of your career in Bitcoin, or your proudest moment in Bitcoin's history? What was something that was made you feel like everything you've been doing has been worthwhile and you're on path?
As is often the case in life, the proudest moment comes very shortly after the most terrifying and vulnerable moment that you ever have. So my proudest moment was when I told my friend and mentor Richard that in 2013 that there weren't any good books for me to learn about Bitcoin, and I really wish there was a book. And he said, write one. And I said, come on, I've never written a book. I've written a few articles. There's no way I could write a book. He says, write one. And I said, okay, well, maybe, let's say I could write a book, and it wouldn't be very good, but let's say I could write it. Who would publish it? And Richard said, which is the one publisher who, if they automatically said yes, you would go to them? And I said, oh, that's O'Reilly Media, the best technical publisher. I have a shelf full of their books. This is how I've learned many of the computer science topics. And he said, okay, put a proposal together and pitch it only to O'Reilly. And I said, that's never going to work, Richard. I'm a zero-time author. I've never written a book, and I'm going to pitch them a technology that they've never heard of and tell them that this can be a successful book. And I did that proposal. It was the most terrifying and vulnerable moment of my life. And it was even worse when they said yes. Because until they said yes, I never thought that it was going to happen, so it wasn't much. But when they said yes, now I actually had to write a goddamn book, and I had no idea what to do. And 1 year later, I became an O'Reilly author. And it was honestly the proudest moment in my life, and it was preceded by a year of sheer terror. And when I published that book, I was the most vulnerable I've ever felt in my life, because once you put it down on paper, it's there for everyone to criticize. And of course, it's full of mistakes, right? How could it not be? So yeah, it's exhilarating. I've since done that 5 times. And now my friends and the people in my life laugh, because what happens is I have these, every year I'm in this state of panic and terror and freaking out about deadlines and trying desperately to get the book done. And I hate it every moment of the way. And at the end of it, I'm like, I am never, ever doing this again. Why do I keep doing this to myself? This is horrible. And then the book comes out, and within a month of the book hitting the shelves, I'm like, you know what? I should write another book. And everyone around me goes like, come on, are you serious? So I've been told that this is how pregnancy works too. But it's a similar experience, I've been told.